and all that needs to be done to do a really good job. So that's it. So.
Oh, that's fun. That's fun.
And all that needs to be done.
I have, who else has officiated a wedding before? Just wave your hand if you have. Oh, nobody else has. I used to shock people in my days of pastoring that I said I enjoyed doing funerals more than weddings. And I know that's kind of shocking to people, but I always said people are really kind-hearted and sweet around funerals. And we feel and in weddings, people are posturing for attention and position. So that makes funerals a lot more pleasant. And I always kind of say around funerals, we're in touch with our mortality, and around weddings, we're trying to get in touch with our immortality. So I think, or we're trying to become immortal or something like that. But I know people appreciate it when we care about them on their special day. My advice to people on weddings was always, don't miss the wedding. And they would laugh. And I'm like, no, literally, I mean, you get so caught up in the details and what's going on that you actually then look back later and go, oh, I wasn't present at the moment. I was off in the forest of all these details. And so I'm always like, stop, breathe, be present in the moment. This is what's happening. Yeah. Lauren, did I see you wave?
Yeah, so Paul did not pay me to do this, and we don't normally, but want to plug the podcast from this week. Paul had a great conversation with Thomas Ord on open and relational theology. So if you haven't listened to it yet, definitely highly recommend it. And Carol is very, very much trying to say something. I can't quite tell, but very animated.
I want to talk about that. That was like, I'm not sure I agree or disagree. I didn't quite know what to do with it. So that would be a topic of some time.
Yeah. Oh, I'm reading his book right now called Open and Relational Theology. And it does kind of go along with the topic that I had chosen for today as well, of the idea is of open and relational theology is, to very briefly summarize it, is God does not know the end of what's coming. God is on the journey with us, and relational, and we're doing it in relationship together. We are creating the course of history in partnership between humanity and God. And so thank you for that plug, Lauren. And there is a part 2 coming out to that in 2 weeks. And I'm very intrigued by that idea. But I think, my topic for today was really around, where does hope come from, as some are rethinking our faith, deconstructing our faith. Where does hope come from? And let me give that a little bit of context of where I'm looking at it from, and then you can judge for yourself where you want to take the viewpoint. For me, the language of God's going to make good things happen for me is a very difficult construct, because then I have to say, well, why didn't, as a childhood abuse survivor, then I say, well, why didn't God help me then? Why did God choose not to help me? And that's something I'm having to work through in my belief. And so then as a part of that, it's like, well, then can I have faith for something good to happen ahead? And if not, where does hope come from? Or are we just flailing about? And so that's a topic I want to hear from you guys on a little bit today and think about, and a couple of Bible verses that I wanted to bring out around that. Let's see if I can remember how to operate Zoom here. Again, always my technical difficulties come into play. Okay, now I figured it out. So Psalm 27 is an interesting psalm. And I just love the Psalms because the psalmist is always like, WTF, God, where are you? What is your effing problem? You know, I just love those conversations and that God provides that opportunity for us. And so I'm just going to read the last 3 verses here of, give me not up to the will of my adversaries, or false witnesses that have risen against me, and they breathe out violence. I believe that I shall look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. And some translations, and they're not as reliable translations, but I think it's worth considering that some translations of verse 13 say, I would have despaired had I not believed I would see the goodness of God in the land of the living. Like, I would be brokenhearted right now if I didn't think God was going to fix things for me down the road. So I just want to hear from you guys today. And again, let's give space for some of us who are like, yes, God is an intervening God and he's going to fix things for us, and give space for some to say, well, I don't believe in God as a personal God, perhaps, or is more of a concept or a spirit or something we partner with. And all of those have safe space to exist here. But where does your hope come from, as maybe you're not quite in the same theological space you were before? I'd love to hear from you guys. You can jump in and talk, raise your hand in the Zoom room. But where do you find hope these days as you're sort of rethinking faith and theology?
Well, I guess I'll start. I thought it was, like doing the officiating yesterday. It's like I kind of like the fact that it's really like he really did say God is in everything and in everyone, and so if that's true, we ourselves have a responsibility to act. Instead of just accepting the Lord Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, then I can go be an asshole for the rest of my life. It doesn't work that way. At least the way I was understanding it, it's the fact that, the God of the universe or whatever else is happening, call it energy, call it whatever, it needs me. It needs me to do the work. And I think there's a relational part of there of, like this week, I actually got attacked by 2 dogs. And I didn't get injured because I'm a ninja warrior orange cone thrower, but it was the scariest thing in my entire life. And so right before that, there were 2 girls that were helping me set up the blacktop. And I said, you girls can help me here. And then inside of me, I was like, no, I don't want to go out on the grass because I'm going to get my shoes all dirty. And I hate that. So I was going to send the 2 girls out. And I stopped and I said, don't be lazy. Don't be mean. And I said, in my head. And so I know that was, to me, I recognized that as God was saying, no, Carol, I need you to be in that moment. And so I said, hey, girls, you stay here. I'm going to go out there. Well, these dogs came out of nowhere, rabid, foaming at the mouth. Long story. But and if I didn't listen to that inner voice and an inner correction to be a better person, those 2 girls would have been mauled and we would have been in the Fresno Bee. So anyways, I'm starting to see that thinking and, correct me. But that's how I'm starting to see that I need to do the best I can in my little world. And maybe, just maybe, that might change other people's lives.
Awesome. Thanks, Carol. Lauren and Charity, I see you guys have your hand up in the Zoom room.
So one of the things that was interesting to me listening to that podcast was he's very much working off this construct of God doesn't intervene because God, by nature love, can't intervene because God can't take over people's free will, which I thought was a really interesting construct. And to kind of piggyback on what Carol was saying, he kept talking about how the way that God interacts with us is relational, like what you're describing, Carol. And so in order for God to act in the world, we have to act in the world. And I'm finding that concept more and more fascinating. There was a meme bouncing around for a while that like the most godly people are the atheists that still do something good anyway, not expecting a reward, and like be like the atheist. And it's an interesting concept. And so to your question, Paul, of where do you find hope? I feel like in a lot of ways, I find hope looking around and seeing people that are being decent without a construct of, well, I have to be decent because God said whatever. And maybe even in spite of the fact that the people who are claiming that they do what they do because of God are not being decent. And yet I keep looking around and seeing, wow, there's people out there that are just being decent because they are. And that seems to have been somehow ingrained in us that that's good. Anyway.
Love it. Ann and Amy.
Guess I should unmute that. So I was thinking about passages like, it rains on the just and the unjust, and the general unfairness and honestly cruelty of this world sometimes. And to paraphrase one of my favorite quotes from entertainment of all time, it was that I used to be upset about the randomness and of the universe, that life isn't fair. But then it occurred to me that, well, if it wasn't that way, everything that bad that happened to me would be happening because I deserved it. And that would really suck. So I take comfort in the randomness, unfairness of the universe. And so I think that the hope that I find lies in the good energy and the helpfulness and the love that I put into the world, or try to at least, with a hope that because I'm putting this into the world, these good energies, these good vibes, that when it comes time for me to be in a low point, that my friends and my loved ones will be there for me to give it back.
So kind of the concept of universal reciprocity, what you put out comes back to you.
Yeah.
It's good. Doug, I saw your hand up. Did you decide you didn't want to share? Which is fine if you don't.
I'm see if I can say this quickly. My hope is more people seeing that the Lord is their shepherd instead of the pastor is their shepherd, and the answer is right in front of them in the Bible. They just need to read it. And more people are waking up. And again, like what many people say, if one good thing could come of Trump, that's it.
Can you put a little more verbiage to that? What is that blessing?
More people are waking up to how cruel people are wanting to be and trying to stop them. Election's coming up Tuesday here. South Dakota, we voted for marijuana, recreational and medical. The governor said no because her husband sells crop insurance and you can't insure a federally illicit crop. So she put a lawsuit against it so that they can't have recreational, and it's on the ballot again along with her. More people voted for that than voted for her. Hopefully that's holding true again.
All right, Doug, thanks for sharing. Anyone else? Yeah, James.
Yeah, of course, I always, to some degree, I always feel like maybe I'm a little bit off the mark with you guys because I'm not deconstructing. I may be fine tuning, but I'm definitely not deconstructing. I think on the issue of hope, I'm just realizing more and more how much I have to depend on hope now than I used to. When I was a young man, I didn't have to worry about the country falling apart. I didn't have to worry about my Christian friends acting like total jerks, or or supporting clearly evil policies. And so my hope in God back then was pretty minimal because I didn't have to. I mean, I could lean on the fact that I was, fairly well off and didn't have to worry about anything. But now I'm recognizing that, the fragility of our culture, the fragility of our nation, that that there is no foundation in this world that is ultimately dependable. So I have to lean so much more on God. I mean, honestly, this last week, I know it's going to sound like Southern Baptist or something, but I've been just going through that hymn, on Christ a solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. That's been just going through my head again and again. I can't, as much as I've prayed and been involved, and tried to encourage people to vote with some sanity and to support policies that were civil and decent. None of that ever really changes. But I don't believe in the concept of God on a regular basis intervening in the here and now, because I don't think that's how he operates. He puts us here so that we can grow to be better people, so that we can work out our faith in fear and trembling, our salvation in fear and trembling. So, but I do think that down the road, there is a restoration and a healing that will take place. And my hope is in both of those things.
Thank you, James, for sharing that. I always kind of say I'm optimistically pessimistic or pessimistically optimistic, in that sometimes that restoration of a culture requires a collapse and overturn first, as we've seen through history in the Bible. And so in some ways, I'm sort of in that space of like, and I think Thomas and I talked about this on that podcast as well, that in some ways, we're just in the natural course of human events. This is kind of how it goes in many ways. And if I can do just a quick side road on a really political statement, if you want to get a chill down your spine in the middle of talking about hope, go search Ron DeSantis advertisement called "God Made a Fighter," and I watched it and I was like, it sent chills down my spine. It truly. I almost hate to say this, but I feel like I almost have to. I was like, this is what 1930s Germany felt like. This is what it felt like. It is a truly dear leader advertisement. This is our savior right here, this man. And it scared me, but again, my hope is, and I think I agree with you, James. I probably see it less in a persona of God, but in an interaction between heaven and humanity, that something draws us to our best selves. Lauren, I think, voiced it. I would say there's something either inherently in human beings that wants to do something good without something coming back to us, with a hope that it will ultimately mean in good for all of us. And that gets taught out of us by culture and religion, or there is something in heaven and supernatural that pulls us toward it, I guess, is sort of how I see it. I want to read a passage from the Bible, but first, Hani has her hand up in the Zoom room there. Hey, Hani.
Yeah. Hi. I was just one, my hope is not in that Jesus is coming back every day, any day. That's the best thing I can say about where my hope is and how I explain it. That is not it. My hope is the fact that I found you people, and whatever is there, that voice that guides my steps daily, that I depend on, that's my hope. And I don't know really how to explain that. But, it's in community, and it's in the fact that I can find people like you with my limited brain, I can be brought there.
Well, Hani, you have a great brain. So I'm going to read a fairly lengthy passage from the Bible, which is a little bit unusual for us. But I've probably talked about this before, but I was on a podcast with an atheist, maybe a year ago now, a while back. And they asked, like, these atheist guys were saying, well, we love your view of the world, of Christianity. Like, why do you hold to Christianity at all? Why do you hold to a belief in a God at all? And it did make me think about it. And the thing that I've had these supernatural experiences, and those are hard to get rid of. But I think ultimately, when I really think about it, it is, why do humans have a sense of purpose? What is it that makes us desire to know why we exist and have a desire to change the world around us? My dog is wonderful. I love him, but there is nothing in him that says, I need to change the world around me. His whole existence is daily based. How can I get Paul and my mom to give me food, take me outside, and all of those things. But humans, there's something that tells us there's something beyond what we see and beyond ourselves. And in the Bible, I see this so well personified in Hebrews chapter 11, of these people of faith who, and James, maybe this is some of our hope today, is they didn't see the fulfillment of their promise in this life. And at times I read that and think it's sad. But then when I think about it, that, the promise went on with them after they passed away from this life, that maybe there's hope for us to say, hey, we're seeing a small context of all of this thing, and there's a much bigger world out there. And so if you have your communion implements, here was my thought today is I just want to read Hebrews 11 as a hopeful passage to look at and be inspired by people of great hope and faith of the past. And I'll give you the finishing line before I even start. If you read Hebrews 11 and know that there were no chapter breaks in the original text, and go to Hebrews 12, chapter 1, it ultimately says, because we have this great cloud of witnesses. So everything we read in Hebrews 11 is setting us up for, here's a bunch of people who would testify that there's something greater than this life. So I'm going to read, and as I'm reading, allow your spirit to start to take in, like, what does faith and hope mean for me? And whenever you feel inspired, just take communion on your own as part of this inspirational moment. And so I'm just going to bless our implements, and you take them as you feel this interaction of humanity and the supernatural coming together to say, there's something greater than me. I'm here for a purpose, and I can change the world. I may not be able to fix Republican, Democrat, midterms, all of that stuff, but I am a part of something that someday I'll see from a different viewpoint and say, I did what I could. I carried myself towards goodness as best I could, and I challenged myself to look for purpose. And so I just bless our implements of the body and the blood, these representations of the hope of death, of hope, and resurrection of hope. And I pray for that to be alive in us today as we share in these implements as I read Hebrews 11. So let me pull it up here. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense to you guys. Just something we tried today. So I'm gonna move my camera over so I can read. I'm doing this from the New Living Translation, so it may sound a little different from those who know this passage from the past, but I kind of like sometimes to read stuff in more common English language. So Hebrews 11:1, faith is the confidence that what we hope for will actually happen. It gives us assurance about things we cannot see. Through their faith, the people in days of old earned a good reputation. By faith, we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command, that what we now see did not come from anything that can be seen. It was by faith that Abel brought a more acceptable offering to God than Cain did. Abel's offering gave evidence that he was a righteous man. That kind of goes along with what Carol was saying, that sometimes it's the use of our hands in cooperation with heaven that shows our righteousness. Abel's offering gave evidence that he was a righteous man, and God showed his approval of his gifts. Although Abel is long dead, he still speaks to us by his example of faith. It was by faith that Enoch was taken up to heaven without dying. He disappeared because God took him. For before he was taken up, he was known as a person who pleased God, or who was in right relationship with God. It is impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who wants to come to him must believe that God exists and that he awards those who sincerely seek him. And again, allow yourself to put that into your context, not necessarily the context of the writer. It was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God, who warned him about things that had never happened before. By his faith, Noah condemned the rest of the world, and he received the righteousness that comes by faith. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. And even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith, for he was like a foreigner living in tents. And so did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. It was by faith that even Sarah was able to have a child, though she was barren and was too old. She believed that God would keep his promise. And so a whole nation came from this one man who was as good as dead, a nation with so many people that, like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore, there's no way to count them. All these people died, still believing what God had promised them. They did not receive what was promised, but they saw it from a distance and welcomed it. They agreed that they were foreigners and nomads here on earth. Obviously, people who say such things are looking forward to a country they can call their own. If they had longed for the country they came from, they could have gone back, but they were looking for a better place, a heavenly homeland. And that is why God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. So I'm going to skip forward a bit here. Let's see. Where was I wanted to go? It was by faith that Rahab the prostitute was not destroyed with the people in her city who refused to obey God, for she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. How much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and all these prophets. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames, and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. Women received their loved ones back again from death, but others were tortured, refusing to turn from God in order to be set free. They placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. Some were jeered at and their backs were cut open with whips. Others were chained in prisons. Some died by stoning. Some were sawed in half, and others were killed with the sword. Some went about wearing skins of sheep and goats, destitute and oppressed and mistreated. They were too good for this world, wandering over deserts and mountains, hiding in caves and holes in the ground. All of these people earned a good reputation because of their faith. Yet none of them received all that God had promised, for God had something better in mind for us, so that they would not reach perfection with us. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. Amen. Anybody want to share anything you heard in all of that? Yeah, James.
Yeah, just briefly, I'm just encouraged that, I think I lost you there. I'm just encouraged that God recounts the people who are flawed. You know, it wasn't a list of all these people who were perfect, who had lived lives where they never failed, they never sinned. They were, great imposing figures or something, but they were human beings with flaws and failures and fissures and all of that. And yet God remembers them. And I think for me that's encouraging, because oftentimes the church I grew up in anyway, we idolized these men who were statues of imposing figures, and who never admitted any flaws whatsoever, and I could never identify with them. But I felt like I could always identify with the people in Scripture, because I could see myself in them.
Love that. Paul.
Yeah, looking at that or listening to that passage, and hearing the list of those names, the heroes, and you see that some of them had some kind of miraculous result and others didn't. And yet they all had to look for something they didn't yet have. I kind of still put myself in that position. I look ahead to with some dread to the election coming up, and realizing it doesn't look good. It's easy for me to become a glass half empty pessimist. But then I also am reminded that after the election, whatever we know the results, we'll still be here and still have stuff we got to do. And a little bit of whatever I can do, I still have to do to try to make things better. I don't know, half-baked thoughts, but
No, they're beautiful. Beautiful thoughts. Anybody else want to share? What encouraged you in that, if anything?
I don't know that's any different, particularly from what Paul was saying, but the idea that whatever we're going through is a very common human experience. People that trusted God went through just about every possible up and down, sideways, backwards kind of experience. Some of them ended their lives, some of them didn't, some received a promise while living here. But you definitely get the feeling that choosing to hope in a God who actually is good has benefit every day. It is in and of itself a good thing. One of the things that I see really kind of wreak havoc in people's lives is despair. It's the lack of hope. It's not being able to see past the current circumstances to anything past it. And as I put in the chat, been around the block enough times after 6 decades of life to know that even the very hardest things I've been through, there was always something on the other side. I was never left to just, I don't know, completely flounder and lose my way. Even when I was feeling, as someone pointed out, my hope is partly, that I found some people I can talk to who, will not judge the questions I have, nor the certainties that I have. I don't have to be a skeptic, and I do not have to have all the answers either way. It's just, life is such a journey of the unexpected. And how we respond to the unexpected, you know, from Carol unexpectedly encountering dogs, or, you know, the loss of a job, or the death of someone close, or whatever, the loss of trust in the religious institutions that you had been part of for years and years and years. Wherever we go, I just keep having to say, if there is anything to all of this, if there is a God, then I choose. Then I choose that my experience has been that as I trust, I find life manages to work out. And there are those for whom it doesn't. People who are truly martyred, or people who live in destitute ways. But if the people in a community lived the way that Christ showed us, those people would not have been in that destitute state, or at least would have had an out. And sometimes I think some of these are really an indictment on us and our unwillingness to live as we should. So it's complicated. It usually is.
Well,
But
yeah.
I choose hope and I choose trust, because anything else leads me to inaction.
I love that, Brenda. And I think I've thought of a lot in my life of like, why would somebody die for another person? You know, why jump in front of a bullet for somebody else, or you know, anything like that? Why would Jesus willingly go to execution? And I don't personally believe it's because God needed to beat the hell out of him to keep us from going to hell. I think it was a demonstration that there is life beyond death, that there is something greater than death. Just like the universe is expanding into something. And I always go back to, what is the container of the universe? What is bigger than the universe? There's something bigger, that, and that's why Jesus was, I think the whole point was demonstrating, if you're willing to die, not only for a friend, but for an enemy, that's how humanity moves forward. That Jeremiah said, no, we are going to be ransacked as a culture. We are going to be overrun by the Babylonians. And because of it, he was thrown into a pit and mocked and all those things. But so why be the weeping prophet? Because there's something bigger than all of this. That's the hope that I hold into. And so I think you're right, Brenda. I don't think it works out for everybody before they die, but I think one day we'll see and know. Peg, I just lost your hand up. Peg, I'd love to hear what you wanted to share.
Thank you. So one of the things that I think about is I work with people who experience homelessness. And so a lot of times when I look at those people, I see hope, right? When you're helping, or when you're doing things, or you're in that moment, you will see hope. And I often think of hope as you know, an anticipation, but I see faith more as walking, right, and doing. And so I do in faith to help answer the hope that they have. And I know that sometimes we interrelate the words, or we may transpose them or use them as similarities, but I see them as one as a feeling and one more as a doing.
That's good. Thank you, Peg, for sharing that. I'll finish with back in Psalm 27, when it says, wait for the Lord, be still and wait for the Lord. Sometimes English doesn't portray what the Hebrew was saying very well. That waiting didn't mean sit and do nothing until God does something. That word wait literally means an active participation and expectation. It means get an expectation and then be a part of seeing that come to be. And that's just my encouragement to us as a community here today. And just want you to know that I enjoyed taking communion as I was hearing your hope today. And that felt powerful. And I pray that same for you as you go forward in your week, that you feel the strength and power and energy and love and hope of us combined as connected people today. Amen. I loved it. Good sharing today. Thank you, everyone. Lauren and Charity, take us away.
Awesome. I will open up breakout rooms. Next week, we will be off of YouTube. Yes, off of YouTube. So we won't be broadcasting. So for those who want to join us, sundaycommunity.com, www.sundaycommunity.com. We'll have the